Yes. So we are live.
So we'll wait for another minute and then we can start. Anyway, it's 7. So thank you all of you for coming to this panel discussion. And before I start, happy International Day of Women and Girls in Science. And I think when it comes to science, it also includes not just scientists but also science communicators, science journalists, everyone. So thank you so much for doing fabulous work in the fields or in domains in which you're working. So first, I'll tell a little bit about the No Nonsense Science Club. So we started No Nonsense Science Club in the year 2019, which was during the phase of COVID, when COVID was just picking up its phase in India, and so why we started No Nonsense Science Club was that we saw that a lot of misinformation and myths about COVID was being spread on social media. Every day on WhatsApp, Facebook, or Twitter, there was like so much of misinformation, and even within family, among friends, people started believing these myths and misinformation, and they were propagating at a rapid pace. So we wanted to do something to curb this progression in the society. So we came up with this platform called the No Nonsense Science Club, where we write articles in English and about 10 Indian languages. These are bite sized articles that we write to debunk myths and misinformation in science. And what we do is we then propagate it in social media again, like Facebook, Twitter, or WhatsApp. And it has been going good. And as time progressed, we thought that we should not just focus on debunking myths and misinformation in science, but rather also look at other issues that are there in the country with regard to science in academia, or with regard to gender diversity or inclusivity and other problems in science communication and academia. So we started writing about scientific temper, about the role of caste, what caste is doing in the area of academia, and so on. So that's how we are here. So once again, thank you all for coming, and then now we'll start. So we have a panelist today, Ashima. She's the co-founder of the Life of Science, which is also called the Lab Hopping. So with a basic background in biology, she then went on to study science communication, and now she's a science communicator. And she has since worked on as an editor of popular children magazine called Brainwave, and she has wrote two books, Fly in Space, and co-authored another book called 31 Adventures in Space. And now she's working on another book called Lab Hopping, so which is about dealing with gender gap across scientific institutions in India. So welcome, Ashima. Thanks for joining us. And next we have Spurti with us. So Spurti Raman is an independent science journalist. So she writes about everything science. So we can say that she writes all the way from neurons to neutrinos. And she writes for national and international magazines like Scientific American and so on. She's also a contributor to Deccan Herald and author of a children's book called India's Adventures in Space. Next, we have Manasvi. Manasvi conducts poetry slam. That's how we got introduced to her. She's also the social media manager of Lotus STEM, which is a global networking and leadership community for promoting women in science or in STEM fields. So, and she's also a graduate of a very interesting field, ethnobotany. And we have Ritika. Ritika is a research coordinator of ADBS lab in Nimhans. and she's focused on stem cell models of psychiatric diseases. She's also very active in psychom and has written article for the Wire, Times of India, and she's the co-founder of India's scientific response to COVID. So, welcome all to this panel discussion. And before we start, I'm Shiva Shakti, and with me is Rupkata. We are the co-founder of the No Nonsense Science Club. And with that, Rupkata, you can take over. Rupkata, you're muted. Okay, by the time she fixes the issue, we've been facing some technical difficulties from our. So I'll start. So in India, we have a lot of women graduates at undergraduate level. But what happens is over the course of time, from undergraduation to post graduation and so on, this percentage gradually drops. Not just gradually drops. Sometimes we even see an exponential drop in the amount of women and girls who pursue science as it goes on. So, what do you think is the primary reason, or why is it happening in a country of so many women, despite the fact that so many states in the country are so literate? Why do you think this is happening so in the country? So we can start with one of you. Say, Ashima, can we start with you?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks, the Nonsense Science Club, Rupkatha and Siva, for having us on this really busy day for those of us who work on inclusion and science. Um, yeah, and your question is the one that we need to ask today and think about today. Because yes, it's true. If you look at the numbers, um, we have um a trend where we see women and girls dropping out of science. And why is that? So I've been looking at this question for a few years now in my work with the lifeofscience.com. And I think the answer is multifold. But the simple answer really is our scientific culture. And I would like to straight away say um, uh, and remove all the doubts, at least in my mind, that it is not the fault or the choice of a group of people who identify as something to leave science. It really is because the culture in our country, and in fact the world, to do science and to practice science and to go ahead in science is not inclusive. There is a lot of gatekeeping. There are a lot of narratives and biases. And the story, the answer to this question really is um, a long one. And because there are so many factors involved, but the simple answer is that it is a patriarchal scientific culture. It is also comes down to the simple um, uh, fact that in our country, a lot of families would rather not spend money on furthering the education of their daughters or their daughter-in-laws. So that definitely folds in, but I wouldn't put the whole blame on the family. I think it is the institutions and the people who are already in science who need to reflect and open up science.
Alright. So, Spurti, what do you think again is the reason for why is it happening? So, you've been, again working in the area of science and science communication for a long time. So, can you tell us about some of the challenges that you have faced as a science communicator, of how it has been, how it has been as a journey for you, and what are some of the challenges that you have faced?
Sure. First, thanks for everybody who's tuned in to listen to us, and thanks for the opportunity to talk and be a part of this great panel. So I think Ashima outlined pretty much everything with respect to the leaky pipeline that we call, right, with respect to why there are fewer people up the ladder. So with science communication, what I see is not very different, I would say, but it's a kind of not. I can't really draw parallels between the science part and the science communication part with respect to representation, because I just have this as an anecdotal evidence, but I do see a lot of women in science communication at the moment, who are starting up, very enthusiastic. They have this knack of storytelling. They want to kind of, do good for the society. There's this benevolence also involved, and a lot of people do come up and say, "Okay, I want to do this. What is the next step?" In the courses that I've handled at different institutes, in the webinars and seminars and workshops that I've been a part of, a lot of anecdotal evidence points to the fact that many girls and research scholars are interested with science communication, and I think many of them do take the leap, sometimes the leap of faith, to see where they want to go, start off, and we don't have ideal platforms to kind of support so many people, in the sense that there is uh, definitely, I think we can go on and on about this, but there's definitely a lack of sustainable platforms that can pay when you're doing psychom, right? Many psychom platforms that we do have either pay very little, like peanuts, or most don't, and it's more like voluntary basis, and there is also no funding mechanism for established platforms so that they can apply for funds and then grant, or rather share it with the people who are contributing to it. And I know for the fact that Life of Science, each year they go through the struggle to raise the funds they need to kind of sustain themselves, and even back at Research Matters, it was the same kind of challenge that we had. So I don't know how sustainability, when it is so tough to kind of sustain what you're doing for a life, for a living, if it becomes so tough, I don't think we will be a good fertile ground for youngsters who are going to come in. So that was a challenge, that remains a challenge as well. And when we don't have enough platforms, you can't expect people to establish themselves on their own. They need that helping hand. It could be either in the form of mentorship, it could be either in the form of giving them, like like I said, being a part of an established platform in any little way possible. So when I started as well, I was just privileged and lucky enough to be a part of Research Matters. It wasn't Research Matters back then, it was the Science Media Center at IAC. And then it grew, and we had passionate people who kind of made it happen with Research Matters. And then from then on, my the steps of the ladders were slowly built. So and there's a lot of privilege also coming into part here, because I come from a family who could afford some kind of education, like decent education for me. And then it was also in a field that was an applied science and not pure sciences. So when I think when I was growing up, I hope it's not true anymore, but I think it still is that when people are looking at applied sciences, it somehow becomes very catchy, and it somehow is like a way to make money and a way to kind of stand on your feet, right? Like engineering for me, and especially computer science engineering at that point in time, was like a very lucrative option. So I had that privilege, but then I realized that if you are very curious in life, that is only going to shut your curiosity down, because life becomes very monotonous. And that's why I chose to do what I'm doing right now, because that kind of feeds into a lot of curiosity that you would have, because you learn a lot of things every single day. It's part of your work. So yeah, from there, it was like with Science Media Center, I started to get a grip of the science writing part of it. I had good mentors, so I was lucky there as well. And then with research matters, I was pretty much running this show, so most of my learning came on the job. So I was lucky enough to have a boss who was okay with me experimenting, who was okay with me kind of, saying I don't really care about what everybody thinks, but I want to do this. So it's not easy to get such people in life that you come across, people and platforms that are so flexible. So I think that also is something that is missing with a lot of psychomers that I see today, because like Ashima already mentioned, this severe gatekeeping even with science communication. I, for example, might think what is science communication, and I would want to only encourage that understanding of science communication. So that again needs to like basically evolve, because science communication itself, in my opinion, is just, we're just touching the tip of the iceberg. There's so much and so many different ways this can all morph into. And if we start gatekeeping right now, we might, it is at our own peril. So that's one challenge that I see coming right now. And then we also don't have more of an international vision of what science communication is like. Countries elsewhere have expanded, are experimenting, including art and theater and so many other forms into science communication. Whereas in back in India, we still look at press releases, or maybe some varied version of press release transformed into an article. And much of it is still through text. And I'm glad in the last couple of years I'm seeing a lot of varied options or varied media for science communication. And thanks to pandemic, fortunately or unfortunately, a bit of that has evolved. But that's about it. And I hope that kind of expands a lot more. And the enthusiastic girls that I see in classes and workshops and seminars, they really get the support that they need and come up. So yeah, it's a long answer. Sure, sorry for that, but I do think that these are challenges in the field that I work right now.
Thank you, Spurti. Thank you for telling us what it is like to be. So, coming to Ritika, Ritika, can you tell us more about how the whole thing works in academia? Because the idea of academia is like completely different. The way we perceive academia now is like every time you tell academia to someone, they kind of start comparing it to a toxic workplace. So. Why is it difficult for women to enter this workplace? Like, what are some of the challenges that women face in academia?
Thank you for the question. It's a very comprehensive question, and thank you for inviting me to join you today. Ashima had sort of already touched on this, and I would like to just elaborate on that briefly. And I think that this again has to do with the culture that surrounds us all, where women have a place. Within that place, you have certain degree of freedom, but that place predominantly is family, is so that's kind of the role you're assigned. Venturing out of that, it is at your own peril in a sense, because there's a whole lot of unwritten rules that operate. If there is a rule manual somewhere, I don't know if any woman has read it, but it's kind of the things that you sort of stumble and always find out the hard way. So because now it's sometimes it manifests as overt hostility, like you've forgotten your place and you need to be put in your place. And on the opposite end of that is what I call killing me softly. These are people who are overtly they come across as very, very nice. Tumse nahi hoga, or you can't handle, let me help, let me get somebody to help. Which is like, if I need help, I'll ask for it. And like either way, it's the manifestation. It's different manifestation, but the same core belief that you can't do it. You're in the wrong place. So it comes at you in very different ways, and it's kind of a constant. And the other thing, which kind of I was recently reminded of, this Indian girl, it's very common phenomena, I think, of all your life you're made to believe that what other people think of you matters. It matters for you what they think of you. And so you internalize everything. So even when somebody is mean to you, nasty to you, that thought might cross your mind, but you will predominantly think of it as, I should have done this, I should have tried that, which makes it very easy for if somebody is in that sort of playing mind games kind of a sphere to mess with your head. And so it's a combination, an amalgamation for a lot of things that, it manifests in very different ways, sometimes very subtle ways. And it leads you to question yourself all the time, saying, maybe I'm in the wrong place, maybe this isn't for me, maybe they're right. So it's an everyday thing. It's like I read somewhere recently that emancipation is not a destination, it's a journey. So you kind of have to, every day sort of push the envelope a little bit further.
Thank you, Ritika. Thank you for your points on this. So finally, Manaswi, so you tell us, like, coming up as a science communicator, how was your journey like? Because you do poetry slam, which is slightly different, the mainstream way of doing science. I don't want to call it mainstream because nothing is like that, but you do poetry, right? You look at science from through poems. So can you tell me about how it has been, how that set of science communication has been?
Yeah. One thing I want to start with is I think science is a very privileged field. For you to be able to have a choice to say, oh, I'm going to study plants and roam around in the forest or be in the lab 10 hours a day is a very privilege. And this disparity is like especially visible not only for men, but it's more prominent for women. So I very luckily come from a privileged family and an upper caste family who are very supportive of what I do, even though they don't really understand. Even my dad, I don't think he really understands what I do, but he's very supportive and kind and sends me the Hindu articles every day. Like, do write this, write that. I'm like, that, that's not what I do. But my journey actually started with Ashima. I remember pitching a woman in STEM video. I was thinking about this while driving, and I was like, "Damn, this is such a coincidence." The first pitch I made was for Life of Science, and it was a very like, "Hey, I love you guys. Can I work? Give me something. I have ideas." It was pretty much that, and they're like, "Cool, go ahead." And I remember it was opposite Nimhans. There was a science woman in no, there was a science fest or something like that, and I went around asking people, when you think of women in STEM, what do you think of? And everybody just went Marie Curie, Marie Curie, Marie Curie, blah blah Marie Curie. So it was actually a really nice video, but yeah, that was the first piece of science communication I did, and till now I pretty much do most of my science communication work for free. I'm still trying to like navigate the very thin rope of uh, getting opportunities and trying to build my portfolio, but also not hogging up space so somebody else who's not as privileged as me can also access, but also trying to gain faith in my own skill and my own what can I, and not feel bad that I'm asking for money. And only recently I've done it. I've asked for money. No response yet, but I've asked, and I felt very powerful after that. I'm like, it's my right. I've done the work. I've done it well, and I deserve that. But I think that the field of science is very privileged, and that's why we need to try and make that. And also like gatekeeping, I completely agree. In science communication and science is very prominent. I've seen a lot of projects just go to people because they're friends, or you're just talking and people call up and be like, hey, can you do it? And be like, at least send out a pitch, at least see if other people are interested, or positions get filled up because of references. things like that, which is both. It's like, because science communication is so linked with science, it's everything's very uh, muddled that way. But I think the best thing right now is just keep doing what you do, and everybody is so encouraging. I think, like, the big guys like Ashima and Spurti and everyone, like, yeah, I've approached, I think, all of you, like, at different platforms, and I know many, no, I'm not going to say aspiring, young science communicators who approach people, and people will just be like, Siddharth Karya and all will just be like, yes, take this, do that. So I think all that is fantastic, but we need to start getting paid internships, paid opportunities, more funding into this, because, and we need to also start breaking free from the whole online science communication, which is another topic altogether. But we need, because I think a lot of people on ground are interested in science communication, and we're not accessing them. And if unpaid internships is the only way to become a successful science communicator, that's not very, yeah, good. Yeah.
I'd like to just pull a thread from what has been said just now, if that's okay. Okay, you can hear me, right? Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to add that, we're talking about science communication, and I am like Spurti said, I know a lot of women identifying science commerce. But at the same time, I also know that we are an island. Like, this is because of how we are tuned in. And this is not really the reality. No, we cannot like extrapolate it to, okay, like there must be lots of things. So science itself, like we've discussed, is such a privilege, and psychom then is then another, like the media angle comes in, or content creation comes in. And like from what Ritika and Manasvi said, um, I thought about like how difficult it really is for somebody who gets used to pre-think about what people are going to say, what people are going to think, all of that before you write the content. That makes it really difficult to find your voice. And if you want to do science communication, you have to find your voice. Like, if any, it's a process in writing or content creation. And so this kind of support, or this male confidence, that just freshers, we don't have that. Like, this is why I think we need each other, and we have to keep on working on this, building solidarity. Because like, I know from my, like, now I'm sometimes seen as a big guy, but like Manasvi, I don't really make that much money. Or it's just because it's not like there isn't that much money there, and for us there is even less support. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, just wanted to add, if that's okay, to what Ashima was saying about the confidence part, right? So I do remember this very well, that when I started out, and because I was not coming from the traditional science background, so I was not in a university doing a PhD or something, there was a lot of skepticism among especially male scientists when I used to approach them in my initial days of science writing. They were like, first of all, they were wondering whether I would even understand what's going on with their work, which I did. And second, especially when it comes to typically male dominated fields like physics or engineering, I had to convince them, look, I am an engineer and I do understand what you're saying. So, you know, just like, give me an audience. That itself was a first, big thing. I mean, I'm deliberately using the word giving an audience, because a lot of this feel of being the maharaja, that I was like one, not some existent person trying to kind of get some time to talk. It wasn't, it never was like a partnership back then. Now things have slowly changed, I at least in my experience. I don't know if that is also because I have some years of experience to talk of what I've been doing. But things, at least interactions, have changed for me. but it wasn't when I started off with. And I did realize this was because there was this a kind of, I'm a women angle also, and I do acknowledge what Ashima said with respect to losing your voice because of that. Because then you are trying to, make sure that the scientist who you speak to, or the person who you've just spoken to, is not going to think bad of your work. And then you start to kind of make your work more pleasing in their eyes and in everybody else's eyes. You want to please your editor, you want to make sure that your editor is going to have good impression about your work. Then you want to please the scientist you're focusing on, and then you don't please yourself at the end of the day, in spite of putting all the hard work. So yeah, that is definitely something that I did face back when I was starting off. And thankfully, I had a good support system at my workplace who would, like, back me up whenever we have had instances where the scientists have pushed back and stuff like that. But I don't know, but I do want to make the statement that I do feel comfortable talking to women scientists because they're more, they do open up. They do open up about their work, and it's not just the personal rant of, oh, I'm a woman, blah blah. It's never that. Their storytelling about the work is so on the spot. So I have been talking to, like, scientists in the past year for another book that I'm working on, and I had this stark difference of how women are so forthcoming with their work, whereas men are more like, I did this, I did this, I did this. Women are like, we did this, we did this, and they give you a lot of context. So I wish I had some amount of the male confidence, like Ashima mentioned, in my work, but that's definitely present. And of course, there are exceptions. I wouldn't rule out that, but that's been my experience.
This might be
Yes.
digressing a little bit, one sec, but I just want to add something for all, like maybe young science communicators out there. Like, just ask for money. If they refuse, nothing's going down the drain. They refuse, they're not, your skill set is not being depreciated. They'll just say, oh, we don't have funds, but we may look into it later, or or something else. But just ask for it. It seems like a big deal, but it is not. And also want to share one story of I actually this there was this science communication workshop. I think Ashima and Spurti also were part of it, by Cyrio, and Shreya Ghosh spoke about how you should pitch to um, news outlets, and I pitched to the print, and it got accepted. Like, I had a whole backup plan, like the print, the Hindu, and it got, the first pitch got accepted, and I was elated. And I did everything. I wrote, published everything, not a word about money. And I was like, wait a second. And my whole idea of, because I'd already written for a lot of spaces before, my whole idea of writing for the print was that I get acknowledged not only by the platform but also with money. That, hey Manas, you're a good writer, here's the money, is what I was basically looking for. And at that point, I didn't know what to do. And I was just like all shaken, and I was like, now it's too late to ask. Like, and until now, I haven't asked, even though my science writer friends are like, you should ask for it. They've basically cheated you out of that money. But yeah, another tip that I've learned is, anytime you pitch to any place, after they accept the pitch, ask about the money, because that's the time if they don't mention it, it should actually be mentioned in the pitch. But if they don't, and yeah, and then I later helped a friend, had a similar situation, and I was just like, ask for it. I couldn't, but you can. And she asked for it, and she got her money. So yeah, just don't link your self-esteem or your skill set with money. It's completely different things. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally understand that. Even sometimes when you write for like magazines, you don't get a word about money. Like when I pitched for a couple of magazines, okay, so what happens is that they let you write, and at that point, I was like, okay, fine. I just want to build a portfolio. You don't know that you have to make money out of it. All that you want is like, you just want to build a portfolio where you know that which you want to show other people. So the whole idea is like, okay, let me build a portfolio and then I'll go and work for someone where I'll ask money. But this building portfolio keeps happening, but you're not making any money, or you're not going to anyone to write for money. So that is something which, and even with the art club, with the no nonsense science club, like I personally approach people, as saying that right now it is completely on a volunteer basis. Like, I ask, like, mostly who write for no nonsense science club are my friends. We all came up with this idea and we write, but then we did want funds, so we approached scientists and we approached other people, but they were like, this is not new, you are just starting, and what is going to happen if we are going to fund you and all those things. So that is completely understandable, and I think that is something that, oh, like Manas, we said, we should be like, okay, give me money now, otherwise I'm not going to work for you. Kind of a situation is what we have to completely create now. Yeah, so
Also, one more point. I think science and science communication have this whole romanticized idea of a starving, passionate researcher or artist. Just like, work, give your life away for journals who are going to profit off you. Give your life away to articles who won't give you credit. Like, no, we don't. I don't know how, don't accept that. Like, we have to stop putting, and as women we are even more prone to that, like that, oh, it's okay, it's fine. But yeah.
Just to add to that money thing,
And
you said
sometimes
about
we don't feel we're good enough to ask for money. I don't know. I have had that feeling also. Ask for a higher amount of money, or even ask for money. This inner feeling of not feeling good enough, or I don't know if you can call it imposter syndrome. But there would be another man there with maybe less experience in the same subject, who would be more confident to ask for money or ask for a higher pay. And then I would look at that person and wish I had that confidence. But yeah, don't always I don't always have it. So yeah, absolutely agree with you, honestly.
No, I sorry if I hijack this conversation. Okay, please tell me to shut up, and I should. Okay, but uh, I feel like I'm not good enough either. So like I have an imposter syndrome of having an imposter syndrome. Like, am I good enough to have an imposter syndrome? Like, so if you're doing the work, if they have accepted you to do the work, you're good enough. Ask for it. If so, don't remove yourself from that equation. If anybody was doing the work, you submitted, it's gone through the entire cycle, you're good enough. Don't like second guess yourself. And too much thinking is, yeah, not good.
the other thing with respect to money is, like, I think it's only now that we are having science communicators in India who are doing this full time. So who are dependent on this for a living. Most often, what used to happen at least is that there are people who would do science communication are either professors or somebody who had this established money, and science communication was more like I do it for the good of the society kind of a thing. It was, I think,
Yeah.
that is ingrained so much that yes, you tend to romanticize this idea that, oh, you're doing good for the society despite you being doing something else in the day job, and this is an extra, this is a stretch, this is a pet project, whatever. I think we have to get out of it and actually view this as work that should be paid for, and this is somebody's life and, I mean, livelihood, right? Like you don't just do this for any other kind of work. Suppose you hire a plumber or a any kind of handyman, you don't like do that, right? You don't say, oh, you're a plumber, you anyway fix 10 taps in the day, fix the 11th one for free. You don't do that. So I think we have to stop looking at science communication as this extra lovely pet project. Yeah, it could be for people who can afford that, but I think the system in general should understand that there is a bunch of people who can't afford that. And the same thing applies for print media also, that a lot of submissions, especially in languages that are not in English, don't get paid, like absolutely voluntary work. And it's not, coming up with 300 words is no joke. You have, I mean, sometimes it takes days to get to that 300 words, and it involves, these are your 300 words, you're not just copy pasting from elsewhere, right? And you have to like think about it, come up and write, and make sure it has the needed ingredients to make it a good capturing 300 words. So I think all of that, the more we as science communicators shed light on this whole process of, you know what it entails to write that small little snippet, I think hopefully somebody will stand up and say, oh yes, there is a lot of work involved and that needs to be somehow compensated for. And I think so long that reality is there, and so long people don't understand that this is work that requires somebody's cognitive thinking, somebody's creativity and all that, it's always going to be viewed as a stretch and a pet project, nice to do, fancy thing. Oh, it's always a fancy thing to say I'm a science communicator and stuff, and not really make ends meet. And nobody's wanting to buy a Mercedes with the kind of income you're making, right? You're just wanting to make sure that you live a decent life. So I think that's important.
I think that no nonsense to do a podcast about it. Like there's a lot of material there, so I think that you guys should consider that.
Yeah,
That's
definitely. Sometime soon. Yeah, so that was about about how we have these problems in science communication and how we have to overcome it, and how young science communicators have to like voice out about the problems that they face and so on. So another thing that I wanted to ask is about is that how important is it for scientists, teachers, and science communicators to take forward the history of science? Like we see that the current research is talked about these days, written about these days, but how important is the history of science? Because if you see in school, one story that we often come across is that Newton was sitting under the apple tree and apple fell on his head. Okay, and they made a joke out of it. If only coconut had fell on his head, and that's all we know about, right? And I wouldn't know like how what amount of history. I wouldn't ask what amount of history is needed, but why should history be taught? Like history needs to be taught, but when should it be started in school, in college? Because nobody wants to learn the story. Everyone, okay, I'm from physics. All that I might want to know is F is equal to ma. Force is equal to mass times acceleration. Don't ask me who came up with this, how it came up, and all that. So there is something which is more important than science in itself, the story behind science. I think science will become even more interesting when you know the story, right? So, few words on that.
So, if I may, like you said, stories is what drives people, right? That's why a lot of times people sit through bad movies because it's good storytelling. So, I think that in my perspective, the science we learn in school is very sterile. It's very detached. Most discoveries are more made by white men, and they, like with Newton, it just came out of thin air, and that's just not how science happens. So the advantage of incorporating stories is that you give students a good sense of how science is really done. It never materializes out of thin air, even when it's the first thing. Mendel and genetics, it didn't happen out of nothing. It's always you build on things, and so in terms of teaching science, okay, it gives a truer perspective of what science is, how it moves forward, how it is done. And so it's really, really important, I feel, to tell the stories not only of discoveries but also of people who made the discoveries. What happens as a result of that is students in the advanced stages, after BSc or after MSc, or even during it, have a very distorted sense almost like your, fun house of mirrors, where you kind of sort of see what's there, but it's very distorted. It's far removed from what really is. So, for example, when I used to teach genetics, students would have you just remove from your cultural zeitgeist what God does. You just remove God with gene and saying, if you have this gene, you have this. It's a very deterministic kind of view because, again, science is not done in isolation. Scientists don't, exist removed from society. So how you do science, how you interpret what you see, it's all shaped by the culture that surrounds you. So to teach it removed from that is doing a great disservice. That's my opinion.
And if I can add something here, when we read about the discoveries, we often don't know what kind of labs they were. For example, about Watson and Crick and Franklin, all of that, the kind of people they were, the biases they had, the way they behaved with her, all of that, if we know that about them, that gives us a perspective on what kind of people they were and what was the culture in the lab or in the
Right.
institute and how the science was done. And this is something which is missing when we are teaching science to students in schools, in colleges, and in undergraduate levels. So, how do we think we can change that? Well, Ashima,
Yes, so
there we
stories
change it.
are important, as we've been talking about, and in fact, even when talking about stories, it's often the stories of men that we hear over and over again. And when it comes to women,
Yes.
like Manasvi pointed out in the beginning, it's only about Madame Curie that we know about. We have not heard about many more women. Like we have Joycelyn Bell and so many other astronomers or even other scientists who have done tremendous amount of work. And it is even more difficult or even more difficult to name a scientist, a women scientist in India, right? You ask about women scientists in India, the first name which pops out is CV Raman. But we all know how CV Raman was biased towards women. He didn't want women scientists in his lab. And we don't know about Kamala Sohoni or other women, Anna Mani and so on. So that is what is needed. So that is especially important in science, that storytelling is a must. Like, it should start with a story. Like if you're writing a textbook, don't start away with the ball. Start with who came up with the ball, and then carry on with the concept and everything. So that I think is like really really important, for making science more interesting. More than anything, that will make science more interesting. Rukata, you were saying something.
Yeah, I would like to know what Ashima, Sfurti, and Manasvi think about this idea of teaching about the way the work was done, the kind of people they were, and uh, how do we make students who are reading science now more aware of the society that science is done in, as well as the science, the research. So, Ashima, would you go first?
Sure, sure. I think you're very right, that the history of science and the stories of how science was forged, like this thing that we call science and technology, which is like the new God, how this came to be, we need to know those stories. And I think like a classroom is a great place for that. And I think like as has been suggested, like when you explain the science or teach the science, at the same time we also need to tell the story of science. The thing with stories is we have also been fed stories. Like stories are all good and fine, but we need to hear all kinds of multitudes of stories, right? Like Richard Feynman, he has a very famous book which is full of sexist comments. He's boasting of his sexism in this book. And there are still people who are raving about this book. So this story has been said, but I think things need to be said and resaid. And I'm not sure if we are honestly ready for this in the classroom, although I'm still have my hopes up for the science educators who are researching science education, um, that in the future we will revive the way we are teaching science and include the history of science and also the violent history of science, the sexist history of science, the racist history of science. Um, but I think it's also important as science commerce to revisit these old stories. I think that's an important part of our job, especially as women science communicators. Because, like, if we don't speak for, the marginalized people being the biggest marginalized in science, there are others, right? There are many groups, communities in India. There's no bigger reality than caste. Who it's not like these communities are not scientific people, but they were uh, uh, historically excluded from knowledge making, and knowledge making in India is a Brahmin idea. The scriptures, all of this is in the realm of Brahmanism, and we need to question it. And the only way we can question it and reject it is to, like, tell these stories. And I think one of science historians that I spoke to said it really, really well, that Indian science students need to know who their scientific ancestors are. If they are foreigners or they are Indian, they need to know the stories, because in the absence of this information about who your scientific ancestors are, there will be all kinds of bullshit, nonsense that will fill the space. Um, and this is unfortunately what is happening in this completely divisive uh, society that we're living in today. And if there are gaps, people who want to grab power will take up that space and fill our heads with nonsense like they've been doing. Yeah.
Just to add to what Ashima said, I think as science communicators today, we are creating history, what would be history for the next generations, right? So if we don't uh, collect, chronicle what's happening right in front of our eyes, the history that would be studied 2 generations from now will not have a good body to refer to. So and then if we don't represent women, or if we don't represent people who are quote unquote out of the mainstream, if we don't talk about people, it could be marginalized communities, it could be marginalized peoples, if we don't talk about their contributions or their work, then and nobody will do, like Ashima rightly pointed out, the generations coming in the future will not even know about them, so there is no reference to go back. While there is danger of that gap being filled with all myths and nonsense, there is also a bigger danger of that part being entirely forgotten. So, and if you don't know about anything, you can't you can't connect the dots. Like going back to the Mendel example that Ritika was mentioning in the genetics class that we study. In school, we just study that there was this person who experimented with peas and got some fantastic results. That was the first breakthrough in genetics and stuff. But we don't know that Mendel was a pastor. He had the privilege of experimenting that because of what was happening in Germany at that point in time. So I think getting that historical context is very important, and that can come only through history, right? And I think at least when I was growing up and when I was studying history in school, history was stereotyped to be bad, and I think part of it comes from the way we were taught about it. We were just taught facts and facts and facts without a window to critically think of why that was happening, why the fact was the way it is, right? Like, why did kings wage war? We don't understand the social and cultural context of wars. Even now we don't, and that's why we keep warring against other countries every now and then, right? So it isn't like one crazy person just decides to go and conquer a a state or a country or whatever, right? There is a lot of socio-cultural upsetting things that happen around it, and that's what leads to, bigger turbulences and world wars and everything. So I think getting that historical context is super important, and that is very evident with medicine. So even now, if you see in America, for example, one of the so-called leading country with all medical inventions and patenting and drug wars, we still have a lot of people who are Black Americans who can't access the basic medical care, and a lot of that is imbibed in history. Like if you look at the story of Henrietta Lacks, for example, that tells you why people, especially Black African Americans, are so scared of the medical system out there. And for a person who's going to study this inequality right now without the lens of history, it just data doesn't make sense. We see that there is this lag, but then if we are getting into policy making without understanding the historical context of why that there is, why there is this big gap, we will be doing more damage, in my opinion, than correcting anything at all. So I think as scientists we need to understand, or scientists or people in science, we need to understand that science is a human adventure or an endeavor, and all that we are flawed for being human is visible in science. There is racism, sexism, there is discrimination at various levels, there is privilege and all that. So I think students, when they're studying science at any level, should be able to understand what it is from a concept at that level. So I'm not saying for a first standard or a first grade student you bombard them with volumes of history, but they should be able to understand or kind of connect what some sort of history is, right? They would have at age 5, at least they would have had a concept of present, past and future. So anything that is relevant to them at that point, I think we should make use of every opportunity to do that. And as science communicators, I also think we should humanize science. We can't say science is sacrosanct, we can't say science is the ultimate fact. And I think the pandemic has shown us that science is evolving. There are people who will use opportunities that are right for them to make their selfish moves. We've seen papers that have been published with all unethical things that are around it, right? Especially during the pandemic, just to make sure that they are in the limelight and stuff. So like people will be people and science is a people's pursuit. So that angle of humanity, that angle of being open to critiquing, being open to questioning the results, or it could be the questioning the process and everything, that has to come from as kids grow up. I think especially in the Indian culture, we should let them question in the first place. We should let them question, and if and we should be okay with not having answers. We should be able to be comfortable in that position of not having answers, and we should definitely be okay to say I don't know. And that is something we are not okay to say. And I think all of that bringing together of history, bringing together of science, and then the culture that surrounds it is super important, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think a lot of science is written by like history is written by victors, and we only hear the male perspectives and not the lab assistants or the women who slaved off their life for this. And even a lot of science done by men historically was only because women gave them that kind of comfort. I remember writing an article about this astrophysicist. I don't remember his name, and he like stayed up 48 hours observing the some planet, and the only reason he was able to do it because his sister helped him with food and other sanitary things. So he had the privilege to sit there and be like, oh, I can explore the space. And historically women didn't have that, and now that we do, we are very lucky, and we still are only a small percentage of this population. I mean, there's still a lot of women who probably want to do this or not even aware that this is available for them to pursue. And also, one more thing I wanted to add was like, not only history or science. I think science deserves like all fields of arts, because like Ritika said, I think science is very, the misconception is very big. Like when I was in bachelor's, the concept I have of science was very different. But you know, the actual work you do in a lab or out in the field is so much more different. And if you need to be prepared for it, it's not memorizing facts, because you can get that in a second through Google. What you need to know is, this went wrong, how do I fix this? That requires critical thinking. That requires people to be taught philosophy in science, or history of science, and different other subjects that arts involves, and not just being like, yeah, mitochondria is the power of the house of the cell, because you can always get it on the internet. Anybody can tell you that. You don't need to know that at all. So yeah, there was something else, I can't remember it now, but yeah.
Yeah, that's like the number one thing, when we interview students for research positions in our lab, that's kind of the, just because there's this, I think, an ongoing, like you said, when you're in college, you have a very different concept of what science is and what you're expected to do. So when students want to join, they're very big on, I can do this, I know to do this, I know. But it's, so that takes it's an unfair share of what they think is important. Whereas what we want to know is, we have this problem. Can you troubleshoot? Can you, so the basic things of that get either skimmed over or somehow perceived as not important turn out to be, very important. So maybe it means that, that there needs to be on a much broader scale conversations between people sort of on the other side, because even we know now how science is after having gone through the process. When we were in undergrad and all, it was very different concept of, science is a collection of facts. Ooh, who wants that? Google has collection of facts. So maybe to correct that precision, maybe a whole generation doesn't have to keep finding out this way, because not everybody would want to go in a career in science or a career in science communication, in which case you leave science thinking it's just facts, and that's just wrong.
Yeah, I remembered what I had to say. That was in relation to what Asham and Spurti both mentioned, how we need to show the stories of science. And I think that's very true. Like, we need history of science, but we also need like research papers that get published. It's all like woohoo, but it's actually a lot of work and failures that have gone. Like, you've thought of 3 ideas that weren't publish worthy, and then you found the fourth one that took 1 whole year to get published, or 3, or something like that. So we need like science communicators also. I frankly feel like journals should have a section which is like stories, like, hey, I did this, then it didn't work, so I tried this. I feel like that would make it would be so much more helpful when I read a research paper. But we know that's never going to happen. But that's what science communicators come in, and you say these were the failures or these were the stories. So you don't only see that Instagrammy side of science, which is like, yeah, we did it, but there's more to it than just that. So we need more stories in science, just in general. Yeah.
Lately, I've been feeling that doing science
Yeah, I
and getting
totally
your
agree with what Manasvi just said about, we need to tell stories about failures too. I've always, discussed with my friends about having a journal just for the failed experiments, because nobody talks about
there is a journal like that now.
nobody talks about the experiments which
Yeah,
failed, right? So
there is
nobody,
journal of
like,
trial
not
and
a
error.
single person talks about the experiment which failed. You take like hard drives and hard drives of data, and it just doesn't, nobody talks about which experiment didn't work, because over a course of 1 year, the number of experiments which didn't work is much more than the number of experiments which worked. So I think we need to talk about, and only then the story is complete. A story is never complete without talking about things which didn't work. So that is something which is completely important or totally important. Like even the scientists or science communicators or anyone in the domain of science should be, as Purti mentioned, we should be ready and we should be able to tell no. Okay, I don't know it. I'm working on it, but at this point I don't know it, and that is something that we all need. And that kind of a complete picture I'm still waiting for, like when that kind of, even I'll be happy if some kind of a journal comes up and says that, hey, you know what, we need your failed research.
So there is it's a journal called Trial and Error. It's a website, it's a podcast, and I think it's also a journal now, which is just this kind of stuff that didn't work, stuff that didn't take, didn't survive. So their podcast is very interesting. I would highly recommend.
Oh, I think I'll check that out. Then I didn't come across it till now, but that's a very good suggestion.
As a scientist, you hear about it's very heartwarming to hear. You're not alone. Happens to everybody.
Ritika, you were saying something else previously. It sounded very
Yeah, I
interesting.
feel the parallels between the articles we submit in for journals and also movie making. Like I hear like the behind the scenes of movie making, and they tell you like took them so many weeks and it was a 5-minute sequence. And same, in the paper, it's like 7-panel figure, and one teeny part of that was like 6 months. And people just skim through that. And, oh, gone. Okay, yeah, right. But then how much of your blood and sweat went into that. So yeah, it's nice to hear the stories behind it.
Yeah, I was actually reading a long time ago. I stopped reading it now. But The Lab Girl, and there's a very good paragraph in this. Maybe I'll just tweet it later about how, putting out a research paper, she's like trying to feed her child and she's stained the first draft, and there's like so many other things happening, and all these calamities and chaos are reduced to one sentence of this worked. It's a very beautifully put a paragraph. I will send it later that everybody can take a look at.
Yeah.
Something that I've always had a problem with, is this representation of women in science. When a man does science, he's a scientist. But when a woman does science, or when a minority, someone from a minority community, especially when women do science, it's like she's so hot to be a scientist, or she's a cute person to do science, or it is she's a beauty with a brain. So it is never a scientist. So there is nothing like she is a scientist. So what can we do to remove this, represent this kind of a representation in science? Because it is like, honestly saying, this is very irritating to know, right? So there's this whole idea that, okay, you are a girl, how are you doing physics? Physics is only for boys, or physics is only meant for engineering. Because it's almost stereotyped that the whole of mechanical engineering belongs only for boys and men, and not for girls. So have you been through something like that, and what have you done in that situation? Like, what would you do, or how should we overcome that? Purti?
Oh, well, so I do come from an engineering background which is dominated by men. So I don't know what differently or how differently or what is that is so different that I've done. Maybe I should have been a science communicator then to have done something differently, but I only realized all this after being a science communicator. So I wouldn't really be able to talk about what I did in the past, but I would say that going forward, one definitely. Being very conscious about the voices we represent in our stories is something that I think will change someday somewhere. Like for example, I know getting women sources or people who are not usually very pressy sort of people to talk to is hard. So investing the time that is needed to kind of talk to these people is one thing. The other thing, a beef that I have with this is sometimes it ends up being just a token representation. Like for example, Bias Watch India calls out all these manuals, right? And then just to be not called up, they might just have like a few people representing, like, some women and people from the marginalized communities out there, and that ends up becoming a token representation when these people don't get the same fair treatment on the panel. Like, for example, if the I have been on so many such panels where the men are all hogging the limelight by just talking and talking and talking and not stopping, and it's I generally am not too aggressive to say, "Hey, give me the space." I wish I was, but and then you just wait and wait and wait, and that man has taken like an hour to put across the point, and the other person is, although on the panel, is just reduced to like 2 minutes of the time, and their thoughts has to come across in just 2 minutes, and while they may have had like 20 minutes worth of content to say, and those are all valid contents, not just because she's a woman or something, but it's also because that they have lived those experiences that they are talking about. And it becomes entirely funny when you have men talking about women's experience when they've not even known or experienced or anything, just by whatever they think they know of it, right? So I
Mansplaining.
think, sorry.
Mansplaining.
Yeah, mansplaining is one thing, but also just to snatch your representation through their mouths. Like, I know the student who has gone through this, and then talk about women empowerment and all that without bringing that student along to talk about what she or they felt about, right? So I think that is that tokenization. I think we should be really, really very conscious of. And I do know, I have been on one of these, especially these governance panels, where people like loudmouthed people are on the one side of the table, but you are talking about science communication, but nobody gives you you know anything, because you are on the phone trying to make sense of this whole thing and trying to contribute, but then you are like snubbed away, either because your geography is not in the, like, you are from South India and a lot of other people are from different parts, which is more dominant, or you are not a dominant voice in terms of your gender, you're not dominant voice in terms of your community. So I think those conversations need to happen a lot, especially in psychom. That's becoming more and more prominent, in my opinion. So that's one thing where I think more people get involved and get a fair treatment on these representation panels, can help dispel stereotypes that we're talking about, saying physics is nice, or women astronomer talking giving a talk is cute. I really felt offended when that or ad or whatever, that promotional content was floating around last year, because there was a girl who was talking about astronomy, and she was branded like a cute astronomer. That's not how a boy of that age would have been branded, right? You don't say a cute boy talking about astronomy. So I think we have to be very conscious, especially as science communicators, when we do our stories, when we do content and stuff like that, to not really bring these kinds of adjectives in our work describing about someone's knowledge or someone's research and stuff like that. So yeah, this is just about 2 cents there.
I actually probably had an opposite thing. When I was younger, I was very creative and I was into like sports and arts and English literature and all of that. So when I chose science, many people were like, "Oh, you're so creative. Join science. It's a waste of your creative energies and all of that." But I ultimately found science communication, which is like a perfect combination of that. But back then they were like, "Oh, too creative for science." But one thing I want to say is that, like, of course, representation of media of women in science is quite bad and stereotypical, but also in the field of science itself, it's very different. Like, I've heard personally stories from researchers about how, because they've dressed well for interviews, they have been misjudged or been like, oh, probably doesn't know stuff. that well. And in field, if you're wearing good clothes and stuff like that, not considered a good researcher. Only when you wear chappal and you're wearing a pant like a boy and running around and look exhausted, is when you've been considered like you've done research, you've done the work. And even I've just coming to terms with like, yeah, I'm going to go on field and get tanned, but I also want to wear sunscreen so I don't get tanned. Like, I care about my skin and I'm also a good researcher. That is not like two separate facts. Like, at between I was like, oh, what if I'm carrying an umbrella and asking ethnobotany questions to a Yanadi tribe person? She may think I'm too. But then I was like, no, this is me. And I care about my skin. I also care about science. So this is not different. I've seen this happen a lot. Like, just because you have a good fashion sense or something like that, you get discriminated against in science. I don't know, maybe Ritika, if you've heard of such things or faced such stories, but yeah, that is also quite prominent. Yeah.
Yeah, you do get comments and sideway glances, and it's not just men. That's the thing, patriarchy is not limited to just the men. Many women have also bought into the fact that, women and what's the appropriate, whatever, thing to wear or how to be, and don't be too loud and don't be in people's faces, and sometimes you have to be.
Should I answer also? Okay. I am totally with you. It is very annoying to see tokenism of women in science. Like, we have done now this like representation work, you can call it, for now 6 years. And I mean, today we started to put together all the talks and series and panels, webinars on a Twitter thread, and there were 11 the last time I checked. Right, and I want to know what is the gender representation? How many women actually work in these organizations that are so happy to organize and mark an event like International Day of Women and Girls in Science? Okay, fine. Maybe you have an intention, so you're putting out a webinar. You're discussing the problem which has happened today. In some of the panels, there were like people in the admin who said like, what is actually a trans woman? Things like this have been said. So yeah, there is, maybe you need some time, but let's see after 2 years how many women will join these organizations, will be in decision making. So there is tokenism with this women in science has become very fashionable, and this is really, really heartbreaking for us who are doing this work, like doing critical work in this, because it's just like you can just say women in science panel and like just run with it. And pose and social media also, I think, makes it a little bit worse. It's so easy to just pose as woke or something, as inclusive culture in your organization. And unfortunately, like we were discussing before we started streaming, that the reality is much worse. But I think, like, as somebody who uses the word woman scientist like quite many times a day, I try to do it in like, in a productive way. I also think like it's a good sign that there are so many panels and things happening, because like I said initially, it's important for us to build solidarities, because to see ourselves as one group. And one thing, like Ritika said, it's not just the men who are doing these sidey comments and judging women and pulling women down. It's also lots of women who do that to each other. And we several times we faced this idea that you are there's the F word. If you use the word feminist, then it's like, no, we cannot get behind that. And I don't understand, like, what's the problem with women standing up for themselves and having a feminist consciousness? Not just women, like all people. What is the problem with this world? Um, so I think people are kind of like safe with just saying, okay, women science ka panel we'll do, but that's where it stops. If you start like being strong, asking for your rights, being cute, and being sciencey at the same time, that's not allowed. Then you'll get all these like red marks and borders being drawn around you. So that's not fair. But I would say, please, let's keep staying cute or not cute or whatever we want to be, because these ideas of gender and science have like infiltrated like deep in our minds, like this bias. And I find like resisting it the most effective way to end it. So yeah.
Well said.
I just had a question to Ajna. So, how do you? So, I personally feel that because I used to host these feminist sort of science and women in science conversations with Lotus Them, and guys would text me and be like, "Am I allowed to attend?" And I was like, "What do you mean? It's open for everyone." It's like, "Oh no, I thought it's a women's only event." It's like, I mean, the point of it is that everybody takes part. And I also believe that, there needs to be, in these conversations where we're having, we also need men to listen because they never listen. But we need to get them to listen and be like, these are the problems, but also, uh, so where do you find that balance between, them being a part of that conversation, but also not just them hijacking the whole thing?
Yeah, so I think what we are kind of the collective is aware of very well, because we started with going around the labs and looking at the reality, and like having very frank conversations with this woman, long conversations that gives them time to, really express themselves. So from the outset, we knew that we're going to have this backlash and this mansplaining. So we really, I think consciously or sometimes not even consciously, we cater to a feminist audience. And we often only quote women. Like 98% of people quoted on the Life of Science, interviewed on the Life of Science, are women. So we are kind of like, please, you can, take over, but like it's not like this kind of space where they can take over is not created in our content. Like it's from the outset, it's catered for uh, and that's not to say that it's not open to dialogue or something. We often do that. um, and But again, like we see very less like when we do webinars and such, and if it's there is a gender gap there. Even when we do, before corona, when we did like live events and stuff, in the audience it was always like a woman in science event, so the man will leave the room, this kind of thing. But I don't know. I think it's about like getting being heard, but the people at the top are not hearing. So we have to kind of like change the culture where we are, and hopefully the voices of together will have power, not like change power, but like have power itself.
So I wonder, I want to just quickly share my perspective, and I wanted to get you guys' view on that. Is I think that within, like broadly speaking, there are men who either think there is no problem. You see women doing science, but what do you mean discrimination, or what's the problem, or where is the problem? But you also have men who acknowledge that there is a problem, but I don't know what to do about it. So I think that those, like that subgroup, needs to be made part of this. At some level, it has to become one person to another to say, this is what it feels like, for to grow that segment of the broader group. And so maybe these panels need to be mixed, where you have men who do understand, who want to participate, who don't want to be part of the problem, to join in. What do you guys think?
I agree that all kinds of people should be part of it, and it's actually like also the cis men, upper caste men have the power right now. So like Manasvi said, the least they can do is listen, but they don't. Like it's often like slowly the space is creeped over, and then you have these mansplaining these problems that we are talking about. So I think like it's nice to have men who understand, who feminist men who are there to listen and understand and learn. But the bar for them is also really low, right? Like you just have to like seem like you listen, and then everybody's congratulating them, and then that feeds into a whole new problem. So I'm very happy to have more and more like cis men in this conversation, and but like platforming them, it has to be done in a very like careful and critical way.
Because like the same way that culture plays insidiously on us, it also plays on them. Like a lot of times I've had conversations with colleagues where they don't realize they continue to interrupt me. So I have to like push back and saying, okay, I'm going to finish my sentence this time, and that's like, oh, I'm doing that again. So it's not intentional. A lot of times it's just what you're used to. So you sort of, so like I would internalize like, oh, maybe I did something wrong, without even realizing I'm going down that road. They would also have this thing of, oh, I interrupted you again. So I think that which is why I also, for me, the quote that I recently read, that emancipation is a journey, that echoed a lot, because it's not like, well, you had your liberation, so good luck, enjoy it. It's every day, it's in small things.
Right.
Yeah, I think it also, you should share your struggles with your colleagues, your male colleagues, even though it may seem easier to do it only with females or female mentors or all of that. But talk about it, even though it may seem like it's not having a lot of impact, just voice it out right then. I've seen like sort of sexual harassment happen in front of me, and I've not been able to say anything because you're worried that, oh, is it just a friendly touch or is it sexual harassment? But you if I spoke about it to a male colleague, and next time it happened, he said, let's not, and he just deviated the topic and got them away from each other. So if you just sort of seek help, or not seek help really, but even just talk about it to not just females, it would, yeah, break, shatter that image that they also have. Yeah.
Yeah, I think also on the men's part, sometimes like Ritika mentioned, it could be subconscious that they just, like they used to like talking about in a panel and they don't care who the other people are. So I think just being conscious of that would be the first step. Be the human, I mean, show some kind, I wouldn't say kindness, but just consideration for the others in the room or in the on the panel or wherever, right? Just be considerate. Like, would you leave the door open for the person coming next to you, no matter who that person is, right? Like, just hold the door kind of a thing. So yeah, I mean, just be considerate on who you talk to, and like again, like Ashima mentioned, any of these should be open to everybody. Like everybody should be part of such conversations, and without being gung-ho about, oh, we have like 80% men in a women's conference or stuff like that. Just I think we should slowly move towards normalizing it, and have a lot of people involved in conversations rather than just saying, okay, how many men or
Yes,
women.
I totally agree with you all. And So we have discussed about several aspects of science and some science communication and what we can do and how we can go about it. So we are towards the end of the program, and I would like to thank each and every one of you for joining us today. And thank you so much, Manaswi. Thank you so much, Ritika,
Thank you once for
Asima,
being
and
here.
Ashwini. Yeah, it's
Thank
been
you.
a
Thank you for
fantastic
organizing this.
journey, and hope we all stay in this fight together to make our voices heard in the future. Thank you, one and all, and we also thank the audience on behalf of the No Nonsense Science Club. So, good night, stay safe, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
Bye-bye.
you.